If you've spent weeks or months creating, modeling, texturing a 3D building or an environment, but you can't seem to get it to look good in the way it deserves to, don't worry, because I'm going to show you the exact steps you need to take to achieve the render you deserve. Composition, the act or process of composing. How does this relate to our 3D art though? Well, it turns out that these techniques are completely universal, and I'm going to be telling you exactly how to apply them to your 3D scenes. Because interior and exterior scenes take completely different approaches, I'm going to be taking you through a full walkthrough on how I compose an interior and an exterior scene. By the way, I'm Oliver. I've been doing ArcViz professionally for about 4 years now, and I'm really excited to share my knowledge with you. Alright, so I've got my urban cabin scene here, and you can check the behind the scenes of how I actually created this project from start to finish on my YouTube channel afterwards. But what we're going to do now to start with for our interior render is we're going to split our scene by right-clicking on the border here, and we're going to go vertical split. And let's just kind of bring it over in the center here. So now we've got two views here. One is going to be for what we see through the camera, and the other is kind of to just have a bit of a move around and rotate things as we see them. The first step that I normally like to do quickly is just change the view focal length to a little bit wider, just that we can kind of like see more in this view here and it's not too like cropped in. So let's go Shift A, and we're going to make a few cameras. So let's start with this camera here, and we just want to make sure that we're clicking on the green camera icon to make sure it's active. And we also want to press number pad 0 on this left hand side one to see what we're actually seeing. Let's also go to the camera settings and click pass part out. I don't even know how to pronounce that, but yeah, we basically want that to be 1 so that we know exactly what we're seeing through the camera. Let's now kind of zoom out a little bit and just see where we've made that camera. So it's actually like way over here. So what we can do to start with, something that I like to do is kind of just scope out a general direction that we'd want to see. So if I kind of go on this angle here first, the next step is to go Control Alt number pad 0. And now we're actually going to set our camera to the relative view that we had in this viewport. And that's just a good way to initially set it up. And basically what we want to do now is to make 5 to 10 cameras and just try to figure out a few good angles of our scene. We want to try to cover everything. And then the process of elimination later on, we will kind of cull these camera options down, and then we'll pick one to go ahead with. But we just want to cover everything and make sure that we are finding the best angle possible. So now that we've made this camera, we can kind of play with this focal length here, which is in millimeters. And you can see when we slide it down, it makes it real wide. And then if we move it all the way up, it's very zoomed in. So for interior renders, I like to go between 10 to 18 or even 35 if you really want quite a cropped in one. So I'm going to start with 10, and that will be quite a fisheye kind of zoomed out look. And then because we've set this camera position up just based on, zooming around, we want to kind of refine this angle. So I like to go on a 45 degree or a front on. So a front on would be like looking flat at this wall here. And a 45 degree would be kind of on a 45 like this. I really don't like doing any kind of other increment because it just doesn't have a very strong composition. So as a rule of thumb, either go front on to the scene like this, so everything's kind of all flat, or go on a direct 45 degree to create some nice interest there. Anything else is just kind of like, just doesn't work as well. It can work, but as a rule of thumb, stick with that. So I'm going to go into item, and we're just going to kind of refine these numbers here. So let's click on 0 for that. And then we're going to go play around with this X1. So we really want this to be 90 degrees. And that's going to mean that it's going to be like not tilted up or down. And then this z-axis here, we really want this to be on a 45. So let's just refine this. This is going to be 270 degrees, I think. Nope, that's front on. So let's pull it back 45 degrees to, oh God, is it 240? I think so. My math might be a little bit off there. So what we want to do now that we've created one quite interesting one is we basically want to go through the same process and just create 5 or 10 different shots. And, you know, I'm going to duplicate this and then I just hit it. That's really useful. Thanks, Ollie. I'm going to duplicate this and click on the camera icon of the new one just so that we can see it. And let's just have a little play around. So I'm going to go rotate on the z-axis and we're just going to like do the complete opposite. So we're going to flip it around and you can see here that's actually quite an interesting view too. And it just provides some really interesting opportunities. And you can see also this is like a vertical Instagram kind of shot as opposed to like a horizontal one. And you can do this in your output settings. I've got mine set at 1080 by 1350, or you could do 1920 by 1080 if you want like a nice kind of cinematic crop. So that's kind of totally up to you. But the annoying thing is, you literally have to like manually change that after every shot you create. So I wish there was a way to manually set the resolution for each camera, but I don't think there is. If there is, let me know in the comments. So we've got 2 really interesting views here. And then what we're going to do is duplicate again. I'm just going to get a few more in here. Make sure to set this one as active. And I'm actually just going to do a nice front on. So let's just rotate on the z-axis. Cool. You can see that's at 180. And another note here is you want to make sure that your camera is like eye level to the scene. So if I move these all the way down so that they're literally in the floor, you want to make sure that the height of this is like the height of an average person. So I like to go 1.6 or 1.8, and that's in meters. But that's basically like making sure that it's quite a relatable scene and it's a relatable view. And it just means that when someone looks at this image, they feel like they're actually in the scene. So we've got a angle, we've got a front on, that's a front on, and we've got another angle the other side. Let's just do a few more. Let's move this one way over and completely change it up. Let's go on this one here and like rotate it back the other way. Maybe actually a 45 on this that axis there. That could be quite interesting. And the thing is, I haven't really modeled all the stuff that you see here and at the back. So this isn't going to look very good because I haven't modeled this entire scene. I typically model a scene based off a camera view that I've already picked, and that just saves time. So I don't model everything perfectly in every direction. But if you did, that's totally fine, and that makes it a lot easier to just pump out a whole bunch of different renders. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's do one more. So let's duplicate this. Let's do maybe something like this. So you can see all of mine are like on 45-degree angles pretty much. Or they're like front on. So let's move this one back a little bit. I think that's pretty interesting. So now that we've got these ones here kind of set up, we can play around. Oh, I did that one set up before, but we can kind of play around with the focal length now. So we can zoom in a little bit if you want to create a little bit more of a flat image. But I would definitely not go below 10 millimeters. 18 is quite nice. Yeah, it just totally depends on the feeling that you want to create. This is quite nice because I'm cropping out everything that I haven't modeled. So that's quite convenient. And that one's, it is what it is. So that's pretty much me setting the cameras up. The next step that I think is really, really useful is to use the composition guides. So if I go down here to composition guides on the first one that I made, I'm going to go on the golden ratio. And you can see here these dotted lines come up, and these are really useful for kind of positioning your camera and trying to see what the intersections are with your focal point. So I like to line up like the top of this line. If I move this down a little bit, I like to kind of like line that up with a few different pieces of geometry. It really, it's not like this ultimate rule that you have to follow, but it is quite a nice thing to do. So if I go into this one here, go into golden ratio, we can kind of see that this wall here that I select, we could line that up with this one here, and that's just quite a nice little piece of, it allows the composition to flow a little bit better. But really this is just like the kind of icing on the cake. As long as you've got the right angle, this is kind of like just a nice little touch. A lot of people say, composition is the golden ratio, but it's just like a little tool, but it really can't save a bad angle to begin with. So that process of hunting out the right angle to start with is really the important one to go with. So, you can do rule of thirds, or you can do golden ratio, or you can do like a diagonal one. I actually don't do any of these personally because I just have these baked into my mind when I'm creating views like this. But if you're just kind of starting to understand composition, these can be really, really useful. So I'm in cycles mode now, and you can see this is actually how the scene is looking when you enable the HDRI, which by the way, you can get them off Polyhaven for free. So download a few, give them a shot and see how you go. And then you can plug those into your world shader by just literally dragging it from your desktop in. And then you want to just plug the HDRI in to your background node, and then enable Node Wrangler in your preference add-ons. It should be already in Blender, and then press Ctrl T on the HDRI. And then this rotation here, this Z rotation, this is what we want to be thinking about, because this is the rotation of the sun. And the rotation of the sun will actually impact your composition quite a lot. And it's really important to play around with and just see how it's looking. It's quite slow. I don't have the best CPU. But you can see that the sun is kind of coming in this direction here. And if I did something completely different, it would change the composition quite a lot. So let's just see how this looks after making that big change. So now that the sun direction has changed, there's actually no light coming into the building really. And it's lighting the outside, but the inside is just real dark and kind of gloomy. So you can see when we change the rotation of the sun, the shadows change, the light changes, everything changes. And once you set your cameras up, play around for hours just getting the right angle of the sun, try different times of day, because that's really, really, really important. So you don't want to skip on that. So if I go to, let's say I really like this camera here. This is kind of quite a nice frontal view, or I could just cycle through these and see what else we can do. That's quite nice. I really like this frontal view because it really shows off the design quite nicely. So let's change this back to 340 degrees. I think it was on that before based off my testing. And you can see the sun is coming in on the right hand, coming in on the left, but it's really coming in and lighting up the right hand side of this image quite nicely. And it's just creating some nice bounce light, and it creates some nice directionality with the shadows. And I really like that that vibe. It's kind of like an early morning or a late morning, nice kind of warm sun coming into the scene. So the light is really important. If you take anything away from this, the angle of your camera is important and the lighting is important. The next step here is kind of just like a little, just like the composition guidelines. This can help a lot, but it's just like the icing of the cake. So if you enable depth of field and you go and focus object, we're going to click on like, say this table, for example. And then we're going to make sure that our f-stop is like maybe 1.2. And that's going to create a nice depth of field outside of this focus range. It's going to blur the foreground objects. and it's just going to look really good. Now, what I can do here is I'm just going to move this back a little bit, this view, and you can start to see how the depth of field can play a really important role when it comes to the foreground element. So if I move this towards the left-hand side, you can actually see the foreground elements are actually really nice and blurry, and it just creates a nice entry into the scene. So if I move this a little bit more forward, maybe a little bit down, you can see that the couch and everything is in focus, and it's really nice, but all these, the plates and the plant and the this light here, these are all blurred out, and that's a really, really important aspect of your composition is depth of field, because your eyes will immediately go to the sharpest point of the image. Okay, that's really, really important. So don't skip on your depth of field. So now that we've got our interior scene nicely set up with a angle that's front onto the scene, I really like elevational shots. If you check my Instagram out, I do these a lot, but I also do 45 degrees. I just don't really do anything else outside of that. So we've got an interior scene set up with nice depth of field. The sun is in the right direction, and we're nice and front on. The camera's at a good height. We did move it down a little bit, but it just does it makes quite good sense given the location of the camera. You're just wanting to fit things into the frame. So don't worry about moving it up or down. Just start off with eye level. So now that we've got the interior of this set up, let's now go to the exterior and see what we can do. All right, so this is the outside of the urban cabin scene. You can see here, we've got, all this in here. And this is actually a different Blender file. I've kind of removed some objects to make sure that I can actually render the scene, because it's quite a heavy, it's a heavy file with all the planting. So if I start again by creating some camera views, I've got this I've got this scene here split up. So if I create a camera, and then we're going to press, once we make sure that our camera is enabled, I'm going to, is it the right one there? Camera 6. So this one we just made, let's go on 0 number pad. Actually, it's not that one. Where's our new camera? Let's just try a camera 4. Okay. So this is just a little camera here, and we want to set the focal length here. Do you remember when we did our interior scene, we did like 10 millimeters or 18, kind of those lower numbers, and that means that we can fit more in. With our exterior scenes, we actually want to go between 35 to 50 millimeters, and that's actually based off some real world photography settings. So definitely check that, check out what looks good for your scene. I'm just going to duplicate these and bring them across. So what I'm going to start to do here is with our camera, we've got one set up that's kind of at eye level, but because of all the because of all the dense vegetation, we want to just lift this up a little bit and just kind of get above all that. And your scene's going to look completely different, so you just need to apply the same techniques to your own scene. But I've just duplicated this, and let's select this and rotate this around 45 degrees, and then let's bring this forwards and just see what we can get here. So we're kind of focusing more on this pool, and if you don't really get enough foreground elements because you're going front onto this, what a little trick you can do is go and shift Y and then bring that down a little bit. So that's one view here. You can see it's kind of a nice, interesting composition, and really just shooting that on the angle just really helps to create that. If I go back to camera, camera 4? That's kind of our front one, and then we've got our side one. Let's do another one to the side. Let's make sure we're activating this one and rotate this 90 degrees in the other direction. So that's on the 45 as well. And let's just pull this back and get some nice kind of planting in the foreground there. So that's looking quite good. And what I might do as well is just kind of like grab all of the planting there, and I'm just going to duplicate all of that and bring it across, because when I set the scene up, none of that was kind of in view. So we just want to make sure that wherever we are creating a camera, we want to make sure that we are filling out the scene completely, so that you're not seeing something that's unfinished. So let's move this back. And it's really slow because of how just heavy all this planting is. I've got a really bad habit of maxing out my scenes. It's really not good. I need help with that. So if you know someone that can give me help, and help my addiction for adding too much planting to a scene, I'm happy to talk to them. Okay, so let's just delete this first plane we made. Cool. So we've got this set up here, and let's just create maybe one more. And we've got that one, we've got the side one, we've got the front one. Let's do one more that's kind of like quite different. And let's bring this all the way in and then rotate it. Maybe even in that direction there. And you'll notice that we're just too zoomed in here. So don't be afraid to do quite a wide view if you're wanting to fit some stuff in. Let's actually do something like that. And so this is what we get with our first render view here. It's obviously not perfect, but it's kind of interesting in terms of the composition. I would probably look at rotating the angle of the sun, because the focal point here, which is like the house and the sunshade kind of lounge thingies, are in the shade. So if I did maybe 0 as the rotation of the sun, that would look quite good. So that actually does not look quite good, funnily enough. If I make this minus 90 degrees, that also looks horrendous. Let's do minus 180. And you can see the angle of the sun is so vital when it comes to exterior scenes, because the shadow and the light will basically direct your eyes to the focal point. And I feel like this is kind of that sweet spot here. But honestly, this just isn't really that great. So let's select camera 9 and see what that looks like. That's kind of interesting. You've got some foreground kind of elements here, but it's still not perfect. Let's just play around with the sun rotation a little bit more. But to be honest, there are only really a few compositions that will work for each scene. And in my honest opinion, there's one money shot no matter what scene you're doing, and that's often the best that you can do. There's a few, you can squeeze out a few renders, but there's often one money shot that really makes a difference. So let's just enable depth of field for this one. And we're going to just select that lounger if we can. And let's make this f-stop 1.8. You can go up to 5.6 or even 12, but 1.8 just is like or even 1.2 is like the max kind of depth that you can get from a real life camera. But to be honest, because of the planting and everything, this is just quite busy as a scene. So let's see what camera 8 looks like. So camera 8 is the other side, and we are also going to enable depth of field for this. So let's check that. Click on focus, and we're just going to click on this sun lounge. Not sun lounge, this outdoor lounger there. And let's make sure we're going 1.2. And actually, I don't mind this whatsoever. This is quite nice. Because these trees are here, I want to kind of move them down because it's just not really set up to see that. So let's actually bring these trees across so that they are creating a nice kind of backdrop here. And I'm just making these trees a little bit smaller and a little bit denser. So as you create different views, you're going to need to shape the environment around you quite a lot to just make sure that it's looking good, because each view you do, it's going to take a very kind of intentional, unique approach to it. So let's just kind of bring this one back and just create that dappled light again. And also I think the exposure is just a little bit too high. So the last one that I just want to check out here is the front on camera. And this one does feel like the stronger kind of composition, but it isn't perfect yet. Let's just change the sun angle. And now we just want to make sure that the foreground isn't too blown out, because another little tip here is to actually shade the foreground so that it's drawing your eyes into the brightest point of the image. So let's just play around with that. So I think that's pretty good. As just another slight tweak here, I'm just going to create a this plane here. I'm going to duplicate this, rotate it 90 degrees, and actually bring this just behind the cameras, because this is going to shade the foreground kind of better than a tree would, because we really want to just make sure that it's as strong a composition as possible. So you can see here when I add this plane here, you're starting to shade the foreground quite nicely, and it just creates a nice value range within the image. There is still maybe a little bit too much highlights going on here on the building, but it's actually quite a nice start to the image. So what I'm going to do now is render out both the interior and exterior renders, and yeah, we can kind of see how they look after a little bit of post-production, just a little bit of color editing. So I'll see you very shortly. So this is how they came out. You can see the interior one has quite a nice depth of field. The exterior one is also, you know, quite a nice lush environment with some nice sun. And I did move the trees over a little bit just to create a little bit more dappled light over the building. But in general, it's the same approach. So now that we've got our composition sorted, the next step is to refine our HDRI lighting. So check the video in the description below, and also make sure to check out my Instagram and free Discord. There's a link in the description for that too. Like and sub, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.